Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome, a special welcome to everyone from Ukraine, wherever you currently are. And we also welcome those anywhere else in the world who are facing erasure. It's wonderful to see so many now familiar faces on the screen. So a warm welcome also to everyone here who's not from Ukraine, but who's come to stand in solidarity as a community. Your presence is vital, so thank you for coming. Before we go any further, let me just quickly introduce myself for any newcomers. My name is Catherine Cox. I'm an analyst in London and I'm part of the WUJ team. And just a quick reminder, as always, to choose the language you would like to listen to. If you would like to hear English when Viktoriya starts speaking, you will need to select the English language channel now. You will find languages by the globe icon. And if you can't find the globe icon, just look for the little row of 3 dots, should be there. Now, today will be the final webinar before we have our summer break, sadly. And this has caused me to reflect on the last 7 months, and in fact, on the project to date. You may recall that we started with the Anulanov event, and then we had the reading groups, which were an extraordinary experience. And now we're in the midst of the webinar series. It's been quite a journey, both in the outer world in Ukraine and also here in WJ. For their part, every form of hell imaginable has been visited on Ukraine. In spite of everything you're going through, you have retained your humanity and you continue to serve. And the amount of psychological work you are doing under such pressure is staggering. We are so impressed, and it's been lovely to get to know some of you over the last few months. I hope to get to know a few more. We're also aware that you're taking this relentless terrorizing in some way on behalf of us all, which is actually very difficult for us to think about. We're sorry we've not been more effective in stopping Putin and his regime. Vast sums are being expended on Ukraine. Sanctions have been imposed, diplomacy has been attempted. But whilst it has to some degree contained the situation, it's not yet been successful in bringing the war to an end. And you continue to suffer terribly. Within WUJ, we have had Joe Cambray and Ina Krikliuk on synchronicity at a webinar attended by the president of the IAP. We had Sonu Shamdasani and Svetlana Shevchenko on Jung's new cure of souls. Then Marian Dunlea and Elena Brante took us to body dreaming, neuroscience and the body. And then there were 2 webinars by Lionel Corbett and Alina Pozdieva on the emerging new God image, and Murray Stein and Sergei Tekliuk and Diane Stanley on answer to evil. Susan Schwartz and Elena Lulina took us to Absent Fathers. And today we arrive at mythology with Anne Shearer and Viktoriya Roslik. And thanks to the generosity of our wonderful team of interpreters, participants may listen to most webinars in 8 languages. And thanks to Aris, the recordings are available for those unable to attend in person, especially important for those in other time zones. And I'll just say a quick hello to you. The webinars have been of extraordinary depths. The richness of the contribution from extreme suffering of Ukraine, intermingling with the learning of our keynote speakers, has drawn the best from them all. And together we have remembered the fallen and those afflicted by the war in our minute silence. We've contemplated beauty, often from Ukraine, in the slideshows, and we've been stirred and moved by Lysenko's prayer for Ukraine. And in addition to this, we've raised over £40,000 for our colleagues in Ukraine since the beginning of the project. The WJ team has also met from time to time with members of both Ukrainian societies to try and understand what is needed better and not just assume that we know. Last autumn, I thought we were just organising a series of webinars, but I now realise that the webinars are themselves a vehicle for a deeper process, a journey that we're taking together. Last week, I met with Murray Stein, who yesterday attended the IAP's Fundamental Values Working Party. The war in Ukraine raises challenging questions for us all in terms of how to respond, not just to Ukraine actually, but also to what afflicts our community elsewhere. Murray, in the short video interview before his WJ webinar, spoke out very clearly about what he believes our values as analytical psychologists should be. This isn't just about words, but also about action. So together we're working out as analytical psychologists how to respond when members of our community are confronted with an ongoing horrific situation. We cannot be bystanders, for evil will then flourish. So thank you, everyone, for your contributions. And now I'm going to hand over to Sally Arthur. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Catherine. Greetings, everyone from rainy London. Now, as we do at the start of each webinar, we'll pause to think of all of those who are struggling against domination and erasure by powerful imperialistic neighbours. The Ukrainian people have faced devastation in this war, but their spirit is strong. The Russian army continues to inflict terror on civilian populations in Ukraine. We've had the shocking destruction of the Kakhovka Dam and the recent bombing in Kramatorsk, with many deaths of Ukrainians going about their daily lives, including that of Ukrainian writer and activist Viktoriya. Alongside these atrocities, we've heard veiled threats from the Russian government of nuclear war for all of us. And about a week ago, we faced the concern that Russia would swap one dictator for another. Yet still, our Ukrainian colleagues inspire us with their hope and resilience. And we meet now in solidarity with you all to remember those who have suffered in this war. We remember the many who have died and those grieving for them. And we also think of those who've been injured, tortured, sexually violated, abducted, displaced, and separated from family. We'll begin the 1-minute silence now. Thank you. Now, a few words about the question and answer function, which will be opened shortly. It'll be down at the bottom of your screen. After the presentations, there'll be a short time for questions and comments, and you can write your questions in Ukrainian or the English language. Maxim Ilyashenko, our Ukrainian Jungian colleague, will join us in London, and he'll be the voice for your Ukrainian language questions. So I'd like to welcome now our speakers for today, Anne Shearer and Viktoriya Roslik, with short introductions before they take us into a mythical realm. So Anne's career began as a journalist specialising in social welfare. She campaigned for people who are marginalised, especially those with learning difficulties, and her international consultancy work and early books explore ways of creating more inclusive communities. Then she turned her energy from the wider collective toward the inner realm and trained as a Jungian analyst with IGAP in London. Her work as a senior analyst has involved not only private practice, but also training other Jungian analysts in the UK, Russia, and Bulgaria. And a focus of her thinking has been the application of myths to modern-day psychology. She's also written books on Athena and the feminine, and on Themis, the Greek goddess of right order, justice, and reconciliation. But they're subjects for another talk. She'll be talking about Perseus today. And Viktoriya Roslik joins us from Kyiv, where she's a Jungian analyst and member of the UJA group. She's been in private practice for 20 years and teaching children and adolescents for about 10. She uses sand therapy, fairy tale therapy, and mythology in her work. And in her free time, she loves to do gardening and cooking, and also finds joy in music, dancing, and long walks. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Anne Shearer. Over to you, Anne. Oh, you're muted.
Right. Got it? Thank you. I'm going to tell you the story of Perseus, but you're going to be looking at pictures, I hope. Here we are. Let's begin. It's never easy to be a hero. Hang on, sorry. Let's start again. It's never easy to be a hero. Perseus's grandfather, the king of Argos, never wanted him born at all because of a prophecy that his grandson would kill him. So the old king had locked up his only child, his daughter Danae, in a dungeon. But who can keep out the king of the gods? Zeus came to Danae in a shower of gold, and so Perseus was born. Fearing the child, yet fearing Zeus more, his grandfather didn't kill the baby. Instead, he put him and his mother in a little boat and cast them out to sea. Luckily, a fisherman rescued them and took them to the house of his brother, the king. So Perseus grew up like a prince. But then things got difficult. The king wanted Danae, but she most certainly did not want him. The boy, as sons can be, was fierce in defending his mother. The crafty king held a banquet and pretended he would choose another bride. What wedding presents would the guests bring him, he asked. Perseus made a great boast. If the king really left his mother alone, he would bring him the head of Medusa. Now this was impossible. Medusa was a terrible monster who lived on the edge of the underworld. Anyone who approached her and looked into her eyes would instantly turn to stone. This was their fate, but it was her fate too. Once she had been a beautiful and powerful princess of Libya, but she had got caught up in a quarrel between the gods. Poseidon, the god of the ocean, had lusted for her, and she fled into the temple of Athene. He burst in and raped her. This was a huge insult to Athene, an old enemy of Poseidon's. But instead of defending Medusa, he had turned her into a deadly monster. What was Perseus to do? Athene decided to help him. He gave him a polished shield so that he could look at the Medusa in reflection rather than straight in the face. Hermes gave him winged sandals, a magic wallet to put the Medusa's head in, and a helmet of invisibility. And so Perseus cut off the Medusa's head. Out of her severed neck sprang the hero Chrysaor and the winged horse Pegasus. Perseus seized the Medusa's head, put it in his wallet, jumped onto Pegasus, and flew off towards home. But on the way, he saw a beautiful maiden chained to a rock, and he immediately fell in love. He swooped down and discovered a kingdom in a terrible state. The maiden was Andromeda, and she and the whole kingdom were being threatened by a terrible sea monster Poseidon again. He had sent the monster because he overheard Andromeda's mother boast that her daughter was more beautiful than his favorite nymphs. The only hope of averting disaster for the kingdom was to sacrifice the girl to the monster. And that's what her parents had done. Perseus made a deal. He would slay the monster if he could marry Andromeda. Imagine how quickly her parents agreed. So Perseus killed the monster and claimed his bride. But he still had work to do before he could found his own kingdom. First, he rescued his mother, which he did by turning the wicked king and his courtiers into stone with the Medusa's head. Then he made the good fisherman who had rescued him as a baby into the king. Now he set off with Andromeda and his mother Danae, his grandfather's kingdom of Argos, which he was to inherit. On the way, though, he stopped to participate in some funeral games. He didn't know that his grandfather was there too. But when Perseus threw his discus, it hit the old man and killed him. The old prophecy was fulfilled. You can't escape fate. Perseus was greatly grieved. He was too ashamed to take his inheritance. But finally, he founded the great city of Mycenae, and there he reigned. And the Medusa's head, it went back to the goddess Athene, who perhaps had wanted it all along. He wore it on her breastplate ever after. Thank you.
Okay, hold on a second. I'll fix it. I'll be reading. Welcome everyone who has joined our online meeting. War is evil, damage, trauma. Just a second, sorry. War leaves scars which remain forever after. At the same time, war gives people the opportunity to get united. War provokes mercy and good towards each other. Many countries all across the globe help us nowadays, support us, and express their sympathy. Today's project is just another confirmation of this fact. I would like to extend my gratitude to the entire team of the project that has been really caring and affectionate. Thanks to Ms. Hannah, we've enjoyed the cooperation with her. It was really inspiring. Our today's topic is myth in our life. Mythical stories and rituals resonate in us today, in spite of their deep roots. Thus, we can feel the depth of timelessness. They tell us how we can experience and process grief and sorrow. And there is never a myth which is free from suffering. Myth is helpful for our consciousness. Myth offers us necessary images and various survival strategies. Strategy of being cunning, compromising, daring, courageous, and this also help us create motivation. The image of hero is indispensable to each and every myth. It's most vividly represented in Greek mythology. One of the well-known and iconic heroes of ancient Greece is Perseus. Many myths are known to us, and these myths tell us about his greatest deeds, such as his victory over the Gorgon Medusa and rescue of Andromeda. The Medusa complex is always present in wars, where the human spirit petrifies and it is sacrificed to petrified ideas. The Gorgon of war kills before contact and compromise can happen. This psychopathic indifference to other people results in violence in various forms. This complex can affect entire generations as well as state systems where human life has no value. And like any complex, it can give rise to trauma. Someday Medusa was a beautiful lady who charmed Poseidon. Having been rejected, he raped her in the temple of Athena. This deed by Poseidon result from a strong affect that cannot be controlled by the ego. This deed exists in the inner world as uncontrollable rage that can destroy everything. At the same time, Athena endowed Medusa with the horrifying power to petrify all living things. All her femininity was captured in the chains of terror. In the same way, trauma can make us petrified. It freezes our ability to love and demonstrate compassion. While Athena, as a goddess and symbol of wisdom, represents the boundary of femininity in the psyche that does not allow for sensual spontaneity or emotional freedom. She was born from Zeus' head, and she was doomed to be the daughter of her father. She had to uphold the patriarchal world. Perhaps Athens' suppressed energy is reflected in Gorgon. Her own birth was traumatic, and she did not receive the blessing of her mother, the primal source that grants the blessing of sensual femininity. The hero Perseus' feat in Greek mythology is directly tied to killing of the Gorgon Medusa. Perhaps we should find our own Perseus deep inside us, and we have to equip him with all necessary tools to set on the road and bring the head of this horrible Medusa, which makes us suffer, which freezes our emotions. The hero needs help and assistance to overcome his fears, to grasp his courage, to face the challenge. Hermes, Athene, and nymphs give him all the equipment. Hermes is the god of success, so he gave Perseus the sword of consciousness, enabling him to navigate through life in a more conscious and determined way. Athena gives Perseus a shield so that he can protect himself and keep a distance from the archetype. We can recognize the archetype by developing a relationship with it through images in an indirect manner. In order to avoid being seized and consumed and absorbed by archetypal energies, due to this distance, Perseus managed to decapitate Medusa. Nymphs gave Perseus a helmet, which used to belong to the ruler of the underworld. This shield gives him invisibility in times of danger, while winged sandals grant him the ability to fly. That's the spiritual dimension. And also receives back or a wallet where he should put this head into. The ability to hold and contain the shadow. The winged horse is born from the body of the beheaded Medusa. Pegasus is a symbol of victory of the spiritual over the material. Another fruit is the water chrysaor, the owner of a golden sword. The golden sword is the symbol of the divine essence hidden in man. This is in what they live in, and spiritual energy, which was imprisoned, is let free. While returning home, Perseus makes Andromeda free. She was chained to a rock. That's a virgin bride, a victim of a monster that inhabits the unconscious world. Virginity signifies something untouched, something which is the foundation of wholeness. Thus, the hero awakens the soul that was asleep and was imprisoned in the unconscious. Andromeda is the true treasure that Perseus brings home. She's the anima, the soul, that has the potential to stimulate life. This is an incredibly rich myth about the transformation of death into a resurrection, evil into good. It can make us feel the wisdom of life with all its sufferings. It gives us the keys to the spiritual potential. Currently, there are many real earthly heroes in our country. They defend our land. They commit acts of bravery every day. They are ready to sacrifice themselves for the sake of all of us. Most myths give us a picture of a heroic transformation of consciousness. This happens when we stop thinking only about ourselves and our own existence, and we become capable of acts for the sake of someone or something else. And today we observe this heroic transformation of men and women who risk their lives for something more important than themselves. Many warriors choose such a fate voluntarily and make such a decision. Today, more than ever, we understand Bertolt Brecht's phrase from the play Life of Galileo: "Unhappy is the land that needs heroes." By this statement, he refers to the political situation. The symbol of psychological individuality is not implied in this phrase. Our heroes are our strength, our pride, and our pain. Another important topic is the topic of the hero's shadow. Erel Shalit, in the book Shadows, wrote that a hero without a shadow is like an ego without a soul. The shadow is the lifeblood of the hero's soul. One cannot become a hero while being virtuous. Pain can be devastating unless one realizes one's own shadow. Joseph Campbell, who wrote the book The Hero with a Thousand Faces, said, "Yesterday's hero will become tomorrow's tyrant unless he sacrifices himself today. When the war is over, it is important for the hero to leave all the heroism on the battlefield. Otherwise, the warrior's energy can be destructive in peacetime." In the myth of Perseus, the hero comes back home with his beloved woman, who gives inspiration and saturation to his soul, who makes him long for new life. It is not a mean feat to come back to peaceful life. However, it's an incredibly important task for our country that should restore what is damaged and continue its development. Maybe our compassion, respect, and understanding of the effects of war on the psyche of our earthly heroes can also be first steps towards healing their souls. In Ukraine, there are national mythological heroes who can serve as a source of strength and support, who can inspire during such difficult times. First of all, I'm referring to Ukrainian Cossacks. They have always been a mystic, mysterious, and amazing phenomenon. Today, I would like to present the archetype of the Cossack Mamai. Cossack Mamai is a collective image of the national hero of Ukraine. He is the character of multiple legends and tales. He is a symbol of courage, strength, and love for freedom. His image has been especially common in Ukraine in the 18th and 19th centuries. This is the embodiment of the defender's image. Paintings of Mamai often hung in Ukrainian homes next to the icons. They do not bear the names of the authors. There are too many of them. This phenomenon can rightfully be called folk painting. We can always find a set of certain items on the paintings featuring the Cossack Mamai, namely an oak tree, a horse, a spear, a pipe for smoking tobacco, and a musical instrument, bandura or kobza, a cup and a hat, and some weapons. The oak tree represents kinship. That's the tree of life and vitality. The horse is the best friend of Cossack. The horse is Cossacks' companion both in peace and in war. It's a symbol of freedom, loyalty, and sacrifice. The spear, as well as the cup, reminds us of the evasive nature of life and the daily threats awaiting the Cossack. Spears were put at burial sites, while cups and the jugs symbolized the other world. They were symbols also of fate, while sabers are symbols of victory. In these paintings, the Cossack does not hold weapons. However, these weapons are really close to them. Thus, if necessary, this peaceful Cossack can quickly defend himself. As a rule, our heroes depicted this sitting in a Buddha pose. It may seem amazing that this hero is depicted at the time of his respite. He looks calm, relaxed, and a bit dreamy. His inner strength is revealed while in peace instead of active actions. Perhaps here lies a deeper perception and understanding of the world and self-awareness. Mamai is a traveler, a warrior, a storyteller, a sorcerer. This was called a characterist. That's another name for sorcerer. He was also a philosopher. He turned up as a hero when other Cossacks needed his help, and he could transform into animals. He could also arrest bleeding and heal wounds. He could catch bullets with his bare hands, walk on water and fire, become invisible, and he could also instill panics in his enemies. Another important aspect of this character is his sensitivity to beauty, emotional depth, and delicate lyricism. It's no wonder that most of his paintings feature also a musical instrument, a bandura, highlighting his poetic nature and aestheticism. The bandura reveals his emotional movements, his thoughts and weary sorrow.
The sounding of the strings not always brings joy or calls to battle. This is a cry for those who have left this world. And this is a call to remember the comrades who fell in the battle for independence. Mamai embodies both masculine and feminine qualities. I'm a philosopher, but also a warrior. I'm free, for here is my weapon and here is my horse. I am relaxed, or at least I appear to be. I think my own thoughts, I smoke, I have rest. And if you are my friend, sit next to me. Take a bottle, drink, and smoke. I will play the bandura, and you can sing if you wish. But if you are not my friend, then I have a spare for you, sword and a pistol, and the tree on which I'll hang you. Don't provoke me, for you won't like the consequences. Just don't provoke me. In his book, The Power of Myth, Joseph Campbell describes that one of the Indian political books states that a ruler must hold a weapon of war, a large stick in one hand, and a song, hold the song calling for peace and joint action in the other hand. And this description is similar to that of our Ukrainian hero of Mamai. Mamai was a character. He was Charakternik in Zaporizhia siege. It can be rightfully considered the first political formation in the territory of Ukraine. Zaporizhia siege had all the signs, all the qualities of a republic. It was independent, and all European countries tried to establish diplomatic relations with it. Zaporizhia siege was the soul of Ukraine. It could bring together, unite people of different cultures with different languages. Cossacks were visited by people from various countries to learn military skills, battling skills, but also to learn skills of wise management internally. Despite the discipline, Zaporizhia siege, Zaporizhia Cossacks lived according to principles of complete democracy. All important decisions were made solely by general voting. Cossacks always set out on their tours, expeditions with starting with their right foot first, thus demonstrating that what they are going to do to commit is right. Only those who had passed all the previous trials and who had been initiated into the Cossacks could wear the herring hair cut on their head, which was twisted behind their left ear. The secret weapon of the Zaporizhia siege were the so-called Charakterniks. One of them was Mamai. From very childhood, they develop their supernatural capacities. The most remarkable and unusual feature of Charakterniks was the fact that they were not vulnerable to bullets or to sabers. Any Cossack Charakternik could presentiment, could feel when a bullet was flying towards them. Their neck would become cold. And that helped them easily avoid bullets. Charakterniks were also skilled at finding treasures, healing wounds, bringing the dead back to life, casting spells on enemies. If they needed to hide from pursuers for tactical purposes, these Cossacks could guard themselves with spears and enter into some special psychoenergetic state. Enemies would then mistakenly see them as reeds, and they would pass by. Cossacks developed this special technique, the so-called Cossack salvation. This is about the psychological impact on the enemy. One of well-known and actual heroes of Zaporizhzhia siege was Ukrainian Cossack Ivan Serko, a military commander who never lost a battle. He won 65 battles, and he was elected Koshevy Ataman 12 times, the military leader. He was also a Charakternik warrior. On April the 5th, 1710, the constitution by Hetman Tulip Orlik was adopted, which laid down the rights and responsibilities, duties of all members of the Zaporizhzhia Kazakh army. It is recognized to be the first official Ukrainian constitution. Unfortunately, in 1792, Catherine the Great dissolved the liquidated Zaporizhzhia Kazakh army. However, the spirit of Zaporizhzhia siege still inspires citizens of our country. I would like to conclude this presentation with a performance by a choir of 407 bandura players performing a piece by Taras Shevchenko that happened in Lviv in 2017. That was the national record. The bandura symbolizes lives of those who have not been conquered, who sacrificed their lives, but who lived with dignity and who stayed true to their values. Let's wait for it to start.
What's going on?
You're on, Anne.
Oh, I'm on, am I? Not. Sorry, I was lost in that beautiful, beautiful song. What a privilege to be here, and what a pleasure to work with Viktoriya. We could talk myths for hours, I think. Spending time with the old myths has rather fallen out of fashion for many Jungians. And I just wish that those who doubt its contemporary value could have heard Viktoriya's talk, the way she moved from the foundation of the myth through this beautiful amplification and its relevance to every day. And what I want to do now is to build on her insight and look rather more generally at what myths might bring to our work as therapists and indeed to our lives as we try to understand and move through these terrible times. So that's what it'll be. It does seem to me that there's a vital continuation between the life of the individual, the experience of the individual, and the collective. For me, one of Jung's greatest insights is his understanding that the individual and collective worlds are animated by the same psychic forces. We are all embedded in the deep collective unconscious of humankind. And one way to intimate its energies is through the mythic tales of relations in gods and humans, the meeting places of archetypal energies and human consciousness. So first, what is myth? The English word derives from the ancient Greek. Mythos means the true word, speak about that which is. This is in contrast with logos, which is associated with writing, and so with causal and logical ordering. This follows that. Second etymology associates myth with musteion, which means to close the eyes or mouth, and so is cognate with mystery. Now we could put these two definitions together. Then we get myth is an utterance about that which cannot be spoken, a true speech about that which cannot be seen or understood. I know no better definition of the conscious ego's attempts to articulate the deep unconscious, or indeed the task of the psychotherapist. So, how can spending time with the old stories help us understand more about psyche and the relations of ego and the unconscious? How can it help us in our work and in our own lives? Here are 7 ways, all interconnected, and I'm sure you're all able to think of others. But let's start with these. First and foremost, spending time with myth is an education in living with the symbolic. It's so easy to lose connection with what may lie beyond our mundane experience, when that experience is of tragedy, of suffering, of hardship, of psychic or even literal survival. This is true of individuals, it's true of collectives. The world then becomes divided into black and white, good and evil. I was so struck by what Olga said about this in her contribution to the second UJ's webinar on the self. War, she said, destroys the symbolic. And so the connection is lost to what Jung calls the best possible expression of something yet unknown, the language of symbol. So spending time with mythic stories is one way of recalling a symbolic dimension to our lives and fostering a sense that immediate reality may not, after all, be all there is. Second point, they're all related. Spending time with myths can set the imagination to work. As psychotherapists and indeed as individuals, we know the vital importance of imagination. One of the most painful aspects of depression is that there is none. People simply cannot think that life will be any different from what it is now. Grey, dead, completely lacking in energy. They cannot say, what if? Or what would it be like if I did this? They cannot imagine alternatives. But the old tales are so invitingly rich in imagery. They're often so strange. Who would have thought of a flying horse? They can engage our imagination. We just allow it and don't feel we have to understand them straight away, if indeed ever. Early in his career, at the time of his break with Freud, Jung wrote an essay called Two Kinds of Thinking, which for me is really the prelude to understanding his distinctive approach to psyche. He identified thinking as directed and associative. Directed thinking has to do with logos. It's causal and linear. This leads to that. And it's very hard work, says Jung. Now, associative thinking is quite different. It's to do with mythos. And Jung, interestingly, I think, calls it ordinary thinking. It's the way our minds naturally operate. We're sitting at our desk in the middle of a task, and we gaze out of the window. We see something which leads our mind to wander into different associations and random thoughts. Seemingly unconnected memories come and go and flow into each other. Then we shake our heads and go back to our task. People call this daydreaming, says Jung, a waste of time. But it refreshes us. It gives us new energy. We have moved from directed ego consciousness towards the unconscious, the source of all our psychic life and energy. So myths can set the imagination to work. Third point, myths can tell us about ourselves. We have so many characters, often so strange, and so different from the people we meet every day? Or are they? What is the myth that I am living? For Jung, at the time of his break from Freud, from the myth of psychoanalysis, this was the most urgent question. How could he help his patients if he didn't have this vital information about himself? Isn't this a question for all of us, for our own lives as well as our work? We humans are myth-making creatures. We tell ourselves stories about our own nature, about our place in the world. We need a story that helps us feel somehow at home with ourselves. We suffer when we don't. And through engaging with mythic tales, those archetypes in action, we may come nearer to our personal answer. Which characters do we identify with? Who repels us? Who irritates? We may discover reminders of someone in our own lives. We may begin to see what we are projecting onto others, for good and for ill. These strange old stories can actually bring us closer to ourselves. We need to be careful here not to over-identify with specific characters. This can lead us back to the black and white thinking we're trying to escape. Viktoriya has reminded us of the dangers of getting too close to archetypal energies. That is why Perseus needs Athena's reflective shield to face the Medusa. The old myths have many reminders that the penalty for looking too closely on the gods is madness or even death. It leads us to the fourth point, I think. Myths can help us make relationships between different psychic energies. We tend to think of archetypes as isolated figures, the wise old man, the foolish young. I meant to say the wise old woman, I shall say it now. The wise old woman, foolish young man, maiden, hero. What's really interesting to me is the way they relate to each other as allies, as enemies, and sometimes both at once. Does the hero need a maiden in distress as much as she needs him? What would Perseus do if he didn't have someone to rescue? Does Athena need the Medusa? She certainly wears her head on her best breastplate forever after Perseus returns it to her. What does that say about each of these personifications of the feminine? These are all internal characters, aren't they? They're internal characters. We're trying to see how our inner cast of characters relate to each other. Let's just pause here, just a couple of minutes. So far, we've seen the story primarily from Perseus's point of view. And for the heroic ego, it's obvious. Monsters must be slain, maidens must be rescued, kingdoms must be founded. But Viktoriya has reminded us of the dangers of the heroic warrior. in times of peace. So what about other characters in the story, other characters in our story? What must it be like to be the Medusa, that once powerful and beautiful princess, trapped in hideous immobility, through no fault of her own? Her very gaze, no longer attractive, but petrifying to all who meet it. Are those hissing snakes her attempt to express her rage? Is it grief that lies behind her stony glance? Does she still hope, despite all experience, that the next person to approach her will be the one who liberates her into relationship, who restores what Viktoriya so eloquently spoke of as a human capacity for compassion? Let's take a moment to feel with her, or with Andromeda, another beautiful woman, trapped through no fault of her own, unable to do anything but wait and wait. What does she feel about her mother, whose boasting landed her on this rock? Or both her parents, who sacrificed her to save kingdom? Let's just imagine a little what it must be like for them. Such is the complexity of the inner world. Fifth point, spending time with old myths may help us escape dogma. There's no right and wrong way to work with a myth. What a relief. Listening to Viktoriya's eloquent telling of the story and its significance, I thought, oh yes, you and I could have a lot to talk about. Yeah, we could have a lot to talk about. Yeah, everyone will read the story differently through their own psychological spectacles. As Jung so valuably said, every psychological approach is a subjective confession. In talking about psyche, we are always talking about ourselves. We can't say it often enough, can't remind ourselves often enough that. Jung also said he made the diagnosis at the end of the treatment, not the beginning. We psychotherapists always have to beware, don't we, of our own power shadow, tendency to know what our patient needs. Here we have the right theory, set them into, and at best, we also know we may have only a hint of what psyche has in store for them. and the need for humility in its service. So spending time with the old myths can help us remember that we don't know, that we don't have the answer. Help us just be with the other, and so with the other in ourselves. I've just said it. The old myths are a wonderful education for me in not knowing. They're such a muddle. One moment the gods are in favor of this character. Why do they suddenly change their minds? And what is this person doing here when we thought they were over there? The rational mind, logos, must always seek explanations and understanding. And we need it. And we need them. Of course we do. But we also know we can never fully explain or understand the unconscious. Sometimes what we may need to do is to calm the irritations of logos, its longing for understanding, and just drift into mythos, into closer connection with the mystery that is the other, and the mystery, finally, that is our own selves. The last point, spending time with the old myths can help us live with paradox. How can we understand the paradoxes of archetypal energies? Athene, for instance, is goddess of war, and we certainly saw that in the pictures that Viktoriya showed us. She's also goddess of the peaceful and healing arts. She has a particular gift for restoring sight. Perseus needs Andromeda. Action needs mobility. The old stories tell us perhaps that the opposites need each other, and that is the way the world is. It does seem true, doesn't it? Humans are inconsistent. Ego says one thing, the shadow has other ideas. Animus and anima go their own way. We may certainly wish it was otherwise, but we know that's just the way it often is. I think we all know too the vital, to me, psychological movement. The movement from either or thinking to an acceptance of both and. Either or says, if I'm right, then you're wrong. And we know this leads to the projection of shadow, which is so damaging to individuals, relationships, and indeed the world itself. We know the stubbornness of such attitudes, and what a movement to psychological health it is when people can accept that they and others are both angel and demon, clever and stupid, loving and hating. To me, this is the beginning of true moral responsibility and ethical living. So, in conclusion, Spending time with the old stories draws us into the symbolic world, helps us live in the borderlands between ego consciousness and the deep unconscious, from which we find psychological strength and healing. We may not work directly on these mythic stories in the consulting room. For me, the important thing is that we ourselves are educated in the 7 aspects I've been talking about. And for me, the mythic story is one way into that education. And finally, we may come nearer to our own answer to Jung's question. What is the myth that I am living? We may find, for now anyway, the meaning of our life. A lifelong quest for Jung. And in his late thoughts, in his autobiography, he had this to say about his own myth. The need for mythic statements is satisfied when we form a view of the world which adequately explains the meaning of human existence in the cosmos, a view which springs from our psychic wholeness, from the cooperation between conscious and unconscious. Meaninglessness inhibits fullness of life and is therefore equivalent to illness. Meaning makes a great many things endurable. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne and Viktoriya. That was wonderful. Now, before we go into the Q&A, we're actually going to have a rather strange little segment right now. So please, can you hold your questions, or better still, put them in the Q&A box. You can put them in English or in Russian. But there is something we wanted to say 7 months into the project, which has been prompted by various things. So I hope you will bear with me whilst you hear from me for a few moments. So before we start with the Q&A, I'd just like to explain that, like many Ukrainians, Viktoriya Roslik is a Russian speaker by birth. She comes from Kyiv. She grew up speaking Russian and studied in Russian. And like many Russian-speaking Ukrainians, Viktoriya is now learning the Ukrainian language. Indeed, her paper was presented in Ukrainian. But she doesn't feel yet confident enough to take the questions in Ukrainian. So during the Q&A, she will answer in Russian, which will then be translated simultaneously into Ukrainian English, before then being further translated simultaneously into our other languages, all very complicated. Please let me explain a little about why we have decided to proceed this way. For many of our Ukrainian colleagues here today, hearing Viktoriya speak in Russian would not be a problem. They're used to hearing both languages in their everyday lives. But for others, their Russian language can be triggering, for example, for some who've lived under occupation. Some Russian speakers are comfortable with still speaking Russian. Others have experienced aggression when they do so, and others no longer wish to do so. It's tricky. Language, as I'm sure we all know, is a major issue in Ukraine at the moment. The Russian language is seen as evidence of Russia's attempted Russification of Ukraine, and as such is a means by which Russia attempts to erase Ukraine. And it seems to me that it's important for those of us outside Ukraine to understand some of the background here. And the reason for this is that the issue of language is frequently taken up and distorted in the service of other agendas, and not just by the Russian regime, for example, by the far right in some other countries, who then use it to call for the withdrawal of vital financial support for Ukraine. So the misrepresentation of the issue may influence how ordinary people like you and me and our families and our colleagues away from supporting Ukraine, which then affects how governments act. Propaganda can be very subtle, and such is the way that information is disseminated these days, that we often cannot tell when we're receiving a distorted account. Because it's a complicated issue, I'm just going to attempt to share a few little nuggets of information which I hope will be of interest and increase our awareness a little. Knowledge and understanding help counter misinformation, or as Maurice Stein put it in his recent WJ webinar, they are an answer to evil. So to our Ukrainian colleagues who are going to know all of this, please bear with me. I offer this in the hope that informing ourselves will ultimately be helpful to Ukraine. So just to say, Russian is not only spoken by ethnic Ukrainians in Eastern Ukraine, but also, for example, in Kyiv. In 2022, 81% of the population spoke Ukrainian in their personal life and thought 34% Russian. That obviously adds up to over 100%, but that's because 15% spoke both languages in their homes. During the Soviet period, large numbers of Russians emigrated to Ukraine, and so many Ukrainian families are actually of blended heritage. Now, at different times in its history, the Ukrainian language was prohibited. But after the October Revolution in 1917, an avant-garde Ukrainian language literary scene flowered. Large numbers of new writers and poets appeared that changed the face of Ukrainian literature. There was a policy of nativization. In Ukraine, it's called Ukrainianization. And with it came a huge drive to eliminate illiteracy. But from 1933 onwards, note the date, novelists, poets, journalists, and playwrights were brutally suppressed. Stalin restored the Tsarist policy of coercive Russification of Ukraine. Literally hundreds of Ukrainian writers were shot, deported, or sent to the Gulag, and many took their own lives. There's a martyrology of Ukrainian writers called The Altar of Sorrow, which identifies 246 writers alone murdered during Stalin's terror, and the actual number of intellectuals murdered is not known. Now, the generation of artists is known as the executed Renaissance, or the Red Renaissance. And the term executed Renaissance encapsulated the martyrdom of Ukrainian poets and their legacy in resurrecting Ukrainian culture. And this concept later emerged in opposition to the communist regime, with the new intellectual elite contributing to the struggle for an independent and united Ukraine. And these intellectuals emphasized the individual rather than the masses. Interestingly, Ukrainian was considered the language of uneducated country people in many parts of the country until as recently as the late 1990s. But then everything changed, and at great speed, particularly since the Maidan protests against the Russian-leaning government in 2013, and all the more so, obviously, since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February last year. Surveys conducted by Ukraine's National Academy of Science show a drastic increase in the use of Ukrainian in previously largely Russian-speaking south and east of the country. So in areas where there'd previously been only 10% Ukrainian-speaking, it's risen to more than 70%. So Vladimir Kulik of the National Academy of Sciences had this to say: "The act of choosing is linguistically significant, but also politically significant. Language is now seen as resistance, to resist aggression and imperialism." And as therapists, we can all appreciate that changing languages is not a painless process. Very difficult sacrifices are being made as Ukraine fights for its existence. And during Anne and Viktoriya's talks, I was thinking about what myth Ukraine is acting at the moment. Switching from one language to another is, quote, above all, a challenge for one's identity. Now, there's a UK paper, a paper in the UK called The Guardian, and it sent a journalist along to some classes in Kharkiv for learning Ukrainian. And here are a few quotes that the journalist picked up. One woman said, "I speak the language of the oppressor, but I now consider Ukrainian to be my mother tongue, even if I grew up speaking Russian." Another says she switched languages to relieve myself of a sense of guilt. And another said to forget months of occupation. And another to focus on the future. In 2019, the use of Ukrainian was compulsory in numerous spheres in public life, including administration, education, media, restaurants and shops. And since 2022, in order further to resist Russification, there have been restrictions on Russian books and music. The Kyiv Moyle Academy, which is very prestigious, says this ban should be viewed in the context of the damage that the ongoing war is imposing on Ukrainian culture. And we've all seen pictures of the looting of museums and stealing cultural artifacts and so on. It describes the war as another chapter in the centuries-long suppression of the Ukrainian nation and its culture. Significant for me, Russian books remain in the university library. And to quote Vladimir again, he says, "We must defend ourselves, but we are not going to burn books. We see freedom as central to our political culture." To me, this issue of burning books or not is important. For those of us from Europe, we think of the book burnings in Germany in 1933, including books by Einstein and Sigmund Freud. And in the US at the moment, deep divisions are being acted out in the banning of books. I'm mentioning this also, I have to admit, because it ties in with my Red Book of Europe dream that I had at the beginning of the project. So somehow it does feel to be quite important. Ukrainian scholars say that the first burning of Ukrainian books, or to be more precise, books written in the Ukrainian version of the old Church Slavonic, took place in 1627, so 400 years ago, in a period where Russian and Ukrainian were emerging as separate languages. Apparently, the Patriarch of Moscow, Filaret, ordered the burning of Gospels published in Kyiv in the vernacular version of Cyrillic. Resisting Russification should not be confused with nationalism, which is the identification of one's own nation to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. Hopefully, one day Ukraine will become sufficiently secure in its existence for such measures to be no longer necessary. As Dmitry Zalewski said at the recent UDG conference, Ukraine is in the midst of an ongoing individuation process. The current situation gives rise to many issues with which therapists in Ukraine must grapple on top of everything else. Russian is the birth language of many Ukrainians, so for many it will be their sole language, the language in which they can most comfortably express themselves. How is it when an analysan prefers to speak in Russian? How are our Russian-speaking Ukrainian colleagues coping with working in a different language, if they are? What assumptions are made about those who still prefer to speak Russian? And how do the elderly cope? How do Russian speakers now feel about themselves within Ukraine? Do they fear erasure of something? Everyone will have their own experience of working with this issue. And there isn't really time today, unfortunately, to consider what analytical psychology might have to offer to all of this. WJ has given this issue a lot of careful thought. We've been challenged about it a number of times. It's not comfortable to exclude a language, especially as we have translation into so many languages. It's also difficult to exclude a language spoken by some of our colleagues that these webinars are intended to support. We're mindful of the importance, of course, not to project onto speakers of either language, but to try always to see the person. But this is a very complex situation. And the fact of the matter is that language has been used in Ukraine to oppress and to seek by subtle means to erase a culture. Now, if excluding the Russian language for now turns out not to be the best way to proceed, we will change it. So if you have a view, please do write to us. WJ aims to be a welcoming place for all and to be a place of solidarity, support and sanctuary for all our Ukrainian colleagues in particular. So I hope I've not offended anyone in my quick introduction to the situation as I understand it. In WUJ, we're learning all the time, and although we try the best we can, sometimes our understanding is inevitably a little bit incomplete and imperfect. But in summary, all are welcome here, no matter what language you speak. And with that, I'm now going to return to Sally for the Q&A, and I hope return to the theme of myths and any questions that you may have for our excellent two speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. It's Sally and Maxime. We're here to take your questions, but perhaps while you're thinking about them, Viktoriya, I was thinking at a very practical level about how you use your mythology, or the idea of mythology, in the work with children and adolescents, whether you use it as an inspiration within you, or whether you actually speak to them about the stories, bearing in mind they probably don't know them. Sorry, I've jumped in with the first question, but there you go. It was burning.
Let me immediately respond and say that for a year now, I have not been working with children. So I need to switch off the Ukrainian channel. Okay.
Okay, we hear you.
Okay, I hear you. Just a second. Okay, I hope I don't hear the interpretation now. Okay, so let's go.
Are you getting interference on your interpretation channel?
Yes, because Viktoriya is using Ukrainian channel and I have to translate from Russian into Ukrainian. So we are both in the same channel. We're trying to fix it.
Okay, well, maybe while we're waiting, perhaps we can wait while you fix that and go to another question. There's one from Mark Fossey, which I think is for Anne. He writes, in general, heroes have a tendency to leave a wake of destruction in the path behind them. Ordinary people's lives turned upside down and often destroyed by their acts. Do you think that the desire for heroism is what creates wars in the first place? We all support our rescuing heroes, but is not the opposition also looking for their own heroes to conquer? Oh, you're muted, Anne.
Yes, what you call the opposition is indeed looking for its own heroes to conquer, because this is an archetype of the collective unconscious. And what's sometimes difficult maybe to accept is that that is where we're all human together. We're all human together. And so the more we can understand about that level, the more perhaps we can meet more consciously. That would be a hope. There are heroes and heroes, aren't there? I mean, this is the plasticity of the archetype. You know, it's not fixed. The archetype is never fixed. I think the Cosset Mamai was extremely different from Hercules, for instance. Hercules, the complete thug. Hercules is a complete thug. Interestingly, you remember he had to spend a year dressed as a woman in the service of the Queen to try and learn a little about other aspects of life and of his own life. So I think the heroic energy is a wonderful impulse in some ways. It has a huge shadow, as Viktoriya pointed out. What energy doesn't, really? I wouldn't myself go so far as to say heroes create wars necessarily. I wouldn't. I hear what you're saying there, but I wouldn't. But I think as with any archetypal energy, one of the things I was trying to say is we have to see it in relationship with other energies. No good looking at one isolated on its own. It's in relationship that effect is seen, isn't it? Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Viktoriya, how is the interpretation channel going? Are we sorted, or are you on the Ukrainian one still?
When I disconnect the channel, I obviously don't hear you and your questions. So I've got difficulties. I need to switch between the two, but okay, let me now address your question. So I can use these stories, and our Ukrainian children, they know mythology, Greek mythology in particular well enough. So if I have some figurines, some toys in my office, in my room, I do use them. Now I think about that, many of my clients often come with these stories, kind of. They already come with these mythological stories because they know Greek mythology well enough. A lot of my young clients know the stories.
Wow, thank you. That's an inspiration. I don't think we teach it as well in Britain, at least. Thank you, Viktoriya. So you can raise hands, people. We've got a few minutes left, or put a question in the box. Anything, Max, in Ukrainian?
We have a question in Ukrainian from Anastasia. It's rather a comment, not so much a question, but maybe you could comment on that. As a wife of someone in the military, I could say that it is difficult to be seized with this archetype of the hero. We often see our warriors as heroes, but we also need to see them as ordinary people, as living beings. And that is true. Sorry, bear with me. Okay. So this is true because this is our pain. And I have a lot of compassion for those families. My brother is now in one of the hotspots now. And for me, of course, he's just my brother, the brother I love. And every day I start by checking our Telegram channel if he's okay, if he's there. And when I tell him, you are a hero, he gets very embarrassed. He says, don't do that.
It's another reminder, isn't it, of the dangers of identification with an archetype, about which we've been speaking.
Well, I'm afraid we're running a little bit short on time. Whilst I'm still in the world of Cossack Mame, and who is a poet and plays music, and I love the way he's dreamy, you know, and he can heal. I mean, I just thought both were, who's just a fascinating character. I don't know, Sally, are you doing the thank yous or am I doing the thank yous?
You can both do them.
Both. It was so, yes, it was so
Go for it,
all
Sally.
the thanks we can get.
Yes.
Very good, Sally, you're on.
Thank you both. It was so rich, and will really repay watching again on the ARUS website. And yeah, you've given us so much to think about. That's at a very high level, but also at a very personal level in terms of our own myths. Yeah, thank you, Viktoriya. Thank you, Anne, so much for all your work and all of the preparation that went into this. I know you spent hours and on the slideshows, and it's really very much appreciated. That's my thanks. Over to you, Catherine, for yours. Oh, and there's another one on our chat from someone else thanking. Go, Catherine, over to you. Oh, she's disappeared. No.
There she is.
Yeah. No, you're muted, Catherine.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Sorry, everyone, I just dropped off there. It just, I suddenly lost my connection just as I was going to go into full flow to do the overall thank you. So as always, a huge thank you to all the WJ team, especially Claire Mouchot and Sally Arthur. Big thanks to our wonderful team of interpreters, to Sanctus Medius and Wordly Wise. Also to my nephew, Joseph Cox, and to Anne and Viktoriya for the elegant slideshow, and to Marilyn Matthew for the flyer. As always, we invite you, if you haven't already done so, and whether you're watching live or via recording, to donate 1 hour's fees to help our Ukrainian colleagues who are suffering severe hardship. If you would like to become more involved in WJ, we urgently need admin help. It's a great opportunity to meet some rather wonderful people and to grapple with really challenging issues of the day. So I'm afraid we won't be meeting in August, but we will resume on the 19th of September when Donald Kalshed will speak, and then there'll be a panel discussion with Dmitry Zaleski, Oksana Zaleski, and Elena Brante. Jung referred to the democracy of the psyche, and Donald will be going beyond his well-known self-care system to help us understand what is happening in so many countries in the world today. It's not just a Ukraine problem, where we see the rise of authoritarianism and its dangerous challenge to democracy. What are the psychological conditions behind this? And what can we do when we're confronted by it? And Lisa Marciano of the very popular podcast series, This Jungian Life, will chair. And I was going to go on and tell you who else we've got in our autumn program, because we've got a great lineup and we're going to end up with a community event in December, but we're a bit short on time. So just look out for the flyer, which will hopefully come out before too long. We're working on it now. There is one thing, though, that I will say, which is that we've received feedback from Ukraine that what would be helpful would be some social dreaming matrix groups where Ukrainian and non-Ukrainian colleagues can come together, rather like we did the reading groups, which was such a success. So I'm pleased to say that Helen Morgan is working with the conveners now to put something in place. It's envisaged that the groups will meet once a month, and hopefully we'll get started sometime in the autumn. So do keep an eye out for that. And in the meantime, if there's anyone here who has experience convening social dreaming matrices and would like to participate, please do contact us at WUJ. So if you're missing us in August, and we will miss you, do please visit the WJ image gallery on the ARUS website. Beautiful images there. And also on the ARUS website, you will find the slideshows and recordings of all the webinars. So thank you once again to ARUS. Even though we won't be meeting next month, you will still be in our hearts and prayers. And as always, we pray that you and those you love will stay safe. And we pray that the war will come to an end. We very much look forward to seeing you in September. And now we invite you to stay for just a moment longer as we play Lysenko's Prayer for Ukraine. Thank you, everyone.